Good intentions, bad outcomes, when feminism stops asking who pays the price. Intent is not a metric. Feminist support for the Nordic model is often rooted in clear, articulated goals, reducing violence, limiting exploitation, and challenging gendered power imbalances. These goals are not in dispute. The problem arises when alignment with those goals is treated as evidence that a policy works. Public policy does not succeed because it reflects shared values. It succeeds or fails based on outcomes. When intent becomes the primary metric, the question of impact recedes into the background. That shift is not theoretical. It has concrete consequences for the people most affected by enforcement. The Nordic model sits precisely in this gap between intention and impact. It is widely supported because it sounds aligned with feminist objectives. But soundness of framing is not the same as effectiveness in practice. How policy actually operates. The Nordic model criminalizes the purchase of sex while claiming to decriminalize the seller. In theory, this distinction is meant to reduce harm to people selling sex while targeting demand. In practice, enforcement does not operate in a vacuum. Where buyers are criminalized, police activity does not focus exclusively on buyers. It relies on surveillance of sex workers' communications, movements, workplaces, and relationships. Landlords, online platforms, and service providers respond to perceived legal risk by evicting, banning, or refusing access. Immigration enforcement becomes entangled with policing. Visibility itself becomes a risk factor. These outcomes are not the result of poor implementation. They are structural consequences of a policy that still relies on policing, surveillance, and criminal penalties to function. What the evidence shows, across jurisdictions that have implemented the Nordic model, the documented outcomes are consistent. Violence against sex workers increases rather than decreases. Housing instability and homelessness rise due to evictions and landlord pressure. Police surveillance expands into the lives of women, queer and trans people, and migrants. Workers move into more isolated and hidden environments to avoid detection. Reporting of violence and exploitation decreases due to fear of legal consequences. These are not speculative harms. They are repeatedly documented by survivor-led organizations, public health researchers, human rights bodies, and community-based service providers. The pattern holds across different legal systems and cultural contexts. A policy designed to reduce harm, but consistently associated with increased harm, cannot be evaluated solely on intent. The cost of symbolic solutions. One reason the Nordic model remains attractive is that it offers a symbolic resolution to structural problems. It suggests that patriarchal exploitation can be addressed through targeted punishment without confronting broader issues such as poverty, housing insecurity, immigration enforcement, healthcare access, or labor precarity. Symbolic solutions are politically efficient. They allow movements to signal opposition to injustice without restructuring the systems that produce vulnerability. But symbolic solutions still generate real-world consequences, and those consequences are borne unevenly. When enforcement increases risk for people already facing racialized policing, gender-based profiling, or immigration scrutiny, the cost of symbolism becomes measurable in violence, instability, and isolation. When theory collides with reality, the Nordic model answers a theoretical question. What would justice look like if patriarchal harm could be addressed through selective criminalization? Does it not answer the operational question that policy must address? What conditions reduce violence today? This distinction matters because safety is not an abstraction. It is the ability to screen clients, to work in pairs, to access housing, to seek health care, to report abuse without fear, and to refuse unsafe situations without risking survival. Policies that undermine those conditions, regardless of their stated goals, function against safety rather than toward it. Recentering evaluation on outcomes. A policy can align with feminist theory and still fail feminist objectives. recognizing that failure is not a betrayal of values, it is an application of them. If the aim is to reduce violence, then violence rates matter. If the aim is to increase safety, then housing stability, access to reporting, and health outcomes matter. If the aim is to protect those most marginalized, then the distribution of harm matters. When evaluated on these terms, the Nordic model does not meet its own stated goals. That does not make it controversial. It makes it empirically unsound. The question feminism must ask is not whether a policy expresses the right values, but whether it produces the right results. Safety is not a slogan. It is conditions. Fund liberation, not optics. Your donation supports feminist work rooted in lived experience, accountability, and real-world impact, not polished talking points. Donate to Swap Behind Bars today at www.swapbehindbars.org. The Pink Patriarchy series asks hard questions about respectability politics, corporate and nonprofit feminism, carceral solutions, and the gap between progressive language and real-world outcomes. By tracing these dynamics across history, policy, and lived experience, the series aims to move beyond feel-good feminism and towards something more honest, accountable, and liberatory.